A Silent Song by Leonard, Kibera, Kenya. Slowly, the youth groped towards the door of the hut. He crawled weakly on his knees and elbows. The pain in his spine and stomach rapidly gathered violence. Suddenly, sharp pangs from his navel tore into his body, and for one short, tormenting moment, he was paralyzed. Then, the pain disappeared. It vanished with the same savage fury of its onslaught, left him cold with sweat, left no other mark really, as if it had never been there, but he knew it had only recoiled for another attack. Once more, he gave up the fight, let go his chin and hit his forehead on the dirt of the flea-ridden floor. He did not know what time it was, but he was hungry. Not that time ever mattered. In the gloom of his eternal night, such things as time, day, or beauty had no meaning. Flat and almost imperceptible, they were for him impossible, and lay beyond the bitter limits of darkness. His world only responded to what he could feel and hear and run away from. For it seemed to Mbane now, as he slumped his youth in horror under the weight of closing death, that his short life had been one of retreat. Crawling away on his lameness, he tackled the world around him negatively and never hit back. He thought about his new life away from the streets of the city. His brother, a preacher, had picked him up there, bringing him to this hut which felt so serene, yet so suspicious. It was not just the lack of the urban ruggedness and noise, or the lack of quick footsteps of busy people running away fully to business he never understood, but he would occasionally answer his plea to keep him alive with a drop of copper on his hat. It was not just the feel of the air and wind whizzing through the trees around his new confinement. He could tell that there was meaning in his brother's silence of his something strange and yet perhaps well-intentioned in his voice when he spoke. He could tell it too when his brother repeatedly said, "I rescued you from that barbaric city so that you can see the light of God." Somehow, however, he did recall the city with a kind of nostalgia, not that he really knew it. In fact, he had earned his living on one street only, retiring to the back lane when the street became deserted. But the street had come to mean his life. It is true that he could not tell how long, how wide, how beautiful, how big it was. These were things which would not matter. He had become used to the talk of bright weather, lovely morning, or beautiful sunset, small talk which he could never share. Pedestrians would sing to the blue sky, whistle to the gay morning as their footsteps sang their way down the pavement, and this would taunt him. Still, he would be happy. For it was the gay people who mostly answered his plea. He had come to know how money was the essence of urban life. Dull people, heavy tired footsteps and voices, betrayed anxiety, empty pockets. He had come to know, too, what day and night meant to them. When the sun poured its heat too generously upon him and the flies crawled along the edges of his lips, good men and women spent their time working inside the building next to him and many more up the street. It would be a dead night when the sun withdrew, he knew not where, to yield the street to hostile cold. He would then steal into the back lane, unsheltered but undisturbed, to surrender his vulnerability to sleep and, occasionally, the basest of thieves. From somewhere at the top of the building, the night would burst alive with drums beating strange rhythms that tempted him. Voices would sing, bottles would crack, and men would curse. This, he knew, should not worry him. It was only the voices of the good men and women turned drunk in the refuge of the night brothel after a hard day's work. It was also the turn of pimps and whores galore to smile their way into the good men's pockets after a hard day's rest, scratching one another's faces in the process. He never knew why they were considered so bad. The good men and women woke up when the sun's warm rays pushed out of his back lane, the reluctant cloud of dawn. The whores and pimps went to their own beds then, so what? In a way, he thought of the men with that curious envy of the ignorant. He remembered having once asked his brother how old he was. He had been told 14. For all he knew, Mbane could be much older. He could not tell. Did it matter? But his brother must have been married around his own age. And yet he himself would never be able to reach out his hand in fulfillment of his life in the same way. He could only yearn impotently beyond the reach of darkness and lameness. At such times when bitter self-pity overcame him, he thought of his own light, and then he would smile broadly and bravely. Take this medicine." It was his brother's wife, Sarah, breaking into the hut. Slowly and tenderly she raised his head and put the cup to his mouth. The bitter fluid explored down his throat, and another attack of pain tore through his stomach. "You will be all right soon," Sarah said. "God will be good to you." He knew she did not hold out much hope for him. She withdrew after laying him on the bed to which he had got used to, trusting himself since being rescued from the hard pavement. Heaven's footsteps told him that his brother, Ezekiel, had come in. He sat on his bed as he once spoke for a long time. He himself could not be expected to start a conversation. All his life he had been speaking to himself in his thoughts, and for a long time on the street, except for his mechanical plea of yes, he had no one to address but himself. Now, if anyone spoke to him, he could only carry the subject on a line of uncommunicative thought in his own mind. "Mbane, do you believe in God?" Ezekiel asked. He saw no reason why his brother should ask him this. He only answered to himself, "I don't know. I don't think it matters." He remembered their religious mother, who was now long dead. She used to say that all men were one stream, one flow through the rocks of life. Twisting and turning the pebbles, they would get dirty in the muddy earth. They cried in the falls and whirlpools of life, laughed and sang when the flow was smooth and undisturbed. Now, if anyone spoke to him, he could only carry the subject on a line of uncommunicative thought in his own mind. "Mbane, do you believe in God?" Ezekiel asked. He saw no reason why his brother should ask him this. He only answered to himself, "I don't know. I don't think it matters." He remembered their religious mother, who was now long dead. She used to say that all men were one stream, one flow through the rocks of life. Twisting and turning the pebbles, they would get dirty in the muddy earth. They cried in the falls and whirlpools of life, laughed and sang when the flow was smooth and undisturbed. Did not his life contain a darkness, a blackness no one would understand? Did the Christmas morning procession of good men and women in the city mean anything more to him than that the generous in yesterday's mean men would be evoked, meaning more money for his hat? As they sang and whistled the carol and hallelujah down the morning street, as they got drunk and cursed at one another earlier than usual, he felt he did not belong and they had forgotten him. But had they ever remembered or ever actually noticed him? True, they would pray for him as a matter of course, and drop him a coin. But instead of bringing the knowledge of Christ to him, much as he wished that he should be left alone, some good Christian men and women would once again curse, call him able-bodied, only crippled more every day by the idleness of leisurely begging. He could tell this, too, in the way the authority in the city handled him. It sometimes surprised him that the big vehicle which emptied the dustbin had never swept him away in the raucous noise. And yet, Mbane was convinced it was a glorious thing to believe, to cling, to dream of a future life. It was glorious, this feeling, that far, far away beyond the pangs of darkness lay light, bigger and more meaningful than that which his eyes were denied. There someone would understand and raise the innocence of his crippled life along with his chosen. He, in him hope, and he sang his own happy song, silently to himself, secretly. To the passer-by let his face appear discernible. Yet this happy thought filled his time. It was his refuge at night, too, as they found theirs in the brothel where he, him, his soul, like the letters which they dropped in the pillar box which he sometimes made the mistake of leaning against, had a destination. Often, as he sat there on the pavement, he wished for his journey's end. He wished that his soul were free, flowing everywhere, and not incarcerated in a body which smelt of sweat, unwashed except in rain, and which he could but feel. "Mbane, I asked, do you believe in God?" It was Ezekiel again, and I said, "I don't know," he answered weakly. "No, you did not. You only lay there sobbing." He lay there, knowing another attack was coming. "Mbane, I want Christ to save you. Do you know where sinners go when they die? Do you know where those who are saved go?" "There was once a man called Jez." "Yes, I know." Mbane swallowed painfully. "That is why you brought me here. And do you accept him?" "I do not know. But I now see the light I have often thought about in my own way. You are worse than Judas, Ezekiel hissed in suppressed anger. Will you never stop thinking about your God even in your DI in this hour? I want you to be baptized. He had become more calm now, and he smiled distantly. Ezekiel saw it was hopeless to go on. Still, he would never give his brother to the devil. Mbane, will you not follow the way of good men and women? His strength waned fast. There was no pain, only weakness. Then his head jerked down to the bed. Ezekiel bent down and touched the cold forehead with a shaking hand. He is gone, he said aloud to himself. Yes, he is gone, Sarah whispered. And he was smiling, he said, looking round at his wife. Yes, he was smiling.